Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to start trusting video game reviewers again. And if you've noticed, I have a sunburn on my hand. That's because I went out to touch grass and the sun rejected my very presence. But with that said, a journalist has stepped forward saying that it is time for us to start trusting video game reviewers and journalists again. And I am here to vehemently disagree. We should be trying to collect as much information as we can on our own. We should be averaging these review scores. We should be watching other people play it. We should be looking into these games ourselves, playing them for a little bit if we can, because 9 times out of 10, when we make that purchase, it ends up being permanent. Because if you're anything like me, you just forget about the whole 2-hour return window on Steam, and then it sits in your library, and you have a bunch of games that you don't even play. I need to stop doing that. In an article from The Gamer written by Ben Sledge titled, "It's Time to Start Trusting Video Game Reviewers," Ben writes, "I get it. Games journalists are terrible at video games. Remember that one guy playing Cuphead? Let's ignore the fact that games journalists regularly beat entire games in a far shorter time span than regular people who don't have deadlines to meet. Turn a blind eye to the fact that they don't have a single guide to help them beat a difficult boss or access an area with some abstruse entry method like drinking poison that kills you at any other time. Forget about the fact that they beat them before the patches arrive that make the game easier. They also hate video games and choose to cover this beat because they want to destroy the entire industry. It doesn't matter that wages are low across the sector and crunch is rife, especially when reviewing 100-hour games with bafflingly tight turnarounds. We hate video games and we can't wait to tear them down." Who are you writing this article for? How are you going to start off from the position in which you are trying to attack the very person that's trying to read it that you're apparently trying to speak to in the first place? One of the biggest issues in today's video game journalism and video game reviews is the fact that many of these articles don't seem like they're tuned for, well, the reader. They're not tuned for the consumer, the people that are trying to make an educated purchase or trying to learn more about the industry. No, instead, they are tuned at the inner circles within this industry. They're articles that are targeted at other journalists, and everybody's just talking within these small little groups rather than trying to talk to the people that this information is supposed to be useful for. But you're starting an article off from the most bitter point you possibly could. Absolutely butthurt, by the way. And what do you think you're going to accomplish by this? Do you think any video game player, any reader that's going to be out there that is thinking to themselves, you know what? Damn it, this guy's right. What was I thinking? No, anybody's going to read this and be like, what is wrong with this guy? What chip on his shoulder does he have? I have nothing to do with this. You're bringing up Twitter nonsense more than it is anything else, and you're bringing that into the real world, and you think that everything revolves around it, and it doesn't, man. It doesn't. You want to know why wages are tight? You want to know why your websites are dying? It's because none of you are providing useful information. Now, I shouldn't say none of you. There are some great writers that are out there that stick to their subjective opinions on things, but then also provide a lot of objective truths that are useful for us to be able to make a good purchase. This is not that. This is the opposite of that. This is somebody with a grudge that's writing an article that hates gamers, and you're proving the point that many of us believe. And it's disgusting, it's childish, and it does nothing for us. The myth that game journalists not only suck at video games, but actively hate the medium is one that I've never understood. However, the issue with game reviews is much easier to parse. Gaming in 2024 is team-based. You're Team Xbox or Team PlayStation, Team Fortnite or Team COD, Team Stellar Blade or Team Censorship, Team Developer or Team Journalist. That's how many gamers see it, at least. There's a major problem with games marketing that's fueling this feudal misery. Hype trailers for games years away from release whip fans into a fervor, and the excitement heightens to a level where any criticism of the game is seen as a personal slight. Calling Stellar Blade's protagonist Eve boring meant that you're a part of the pro-censorship wokeottery who can't stand a beautiful woman leading a game. I actually don't disagree with that point. I do think that video game developers and studios end up putting out their trailers a little bit too early, which leaves too much room for players to let their minds run and their imagination run and come up with what they believe that game is going to be. It's part of the fun before a game release for a lot of players. And that does lead to some backlash because, well, folks are going to come out with some criticisms or whatever they might have because they actually got some hands-on time with the game, and then they go to discuss it, and the players don't like what they're hearing from the reviewers, and they give pushback. And to that point, you are right, and that shouldn't happen. But also at the exact same time, what I feel like you're ignoring is the reason why that mistrust is there, and the reason why players believe that games journalists and games reviewers don't have their best intentions in mind, and that's because they often bring in their own personal biases, their own personal beliefs and ideologies into reviewing a game rather than just reviewing a game for what it is and trying to give useful information to the players. And I have a great example of that, and I'm going to show it to you right now. Back in early June, an article from Forbes was written that was titled "Dragon Age: The Veilguard Puts an End to Tactical Combat Once and for All." Eric Kane was the writer of this. Now, what's interesting is that when you read the title of this, you would think he's going to be talking about, well, how they're ending tactical combat and how that's going to be a massive impact on the game, its audience, and who's going to buy it, and all of those things. However, as you're reading through it, you find a paragraph that says, customization allows for players to choose their pronouns, he, him, she, her, they, them, and a mix and match of female and male voices with female and male bodies, effectively modernizing gender selection in ways other games like Cyberpunk 2077 already have. This is sure to be controversial, but at a certain point, we need to stop bickering over every little thing. You can just choose he, him, or she, her, and the appropriate voice if the trans stuff isn't for you, after all. And my question to that is, what value does that give to the reader when they came specifically for the headline that was supposed to be talking about the action combat and the changes and the getting rid of tactical combat? Well, none of those things are necessary talking points. Baldur's Gate 3 had them, and it wasn't a problem for the players. Nobody talked about it. Want to know why? Because it was a fantastic game, and nobody cares about anything that apparently all these journalists believe everybody's up in arms over. Nobody cares about this stuff. They only care about it when it's taking away value from the rest of the game, when it ends up being a shield of inclusivity that they're throwing up because the rest of the game that's behind them is absolute garbage. That's what the biggest problem is. It's not going to be controversial because it's there. It'll be controversial because Dragon Age Veilguard is likely going to be shit. The Gamer article continues with, Team Elden Ring got mad last week when a couple of reviews said that it was too difficult. Accusations flew across the Twitter sphere. The critics behind said reviews were told in no uncertain terms to get good and suffered far worse attacks, as misogynistic as it was vitriolic. Cuphead has been brought up again. Fast forward a week and players are leveling the very same accusations at the FromSoft DLC. Countless mods have added easy modes to the game, one called Journalist Mode, despite the fact that journos beat the game without needing it. Players feel bosses are unfair, they believe the systems are too obtruse, and they refuse to engage with some of the game's core mechanics due to believing that they are a cheater's way out. I wonder if any of them have apologized to the reviewers who pointed out these very issues. It's not just an Elden Ring problem. When Kali Plaga reviewed Cyberpunk 2077 for GameSpot, she was hounded by thousands of players for pointing out the game's negatives. She didn't like the edgy aesthetics that played no meaningful part in the gameplay, so she was labeled a prude. She pointed out offensive depictions of minorities, so she was an SJW. She called out technical issues, obvious even on PC, so she suffered a barrage of hatred. Plaga was at the receiving end of a whirlwind of attacks from gamers excited for CD Projekt Red's new title. 8 years in the making, their excitement as well as the marketing campaign blinded them from seeing fair criticism as exactly that, fair. I don't know her, but I imagine Plaga was excited to play the game too. Games journalists and critics like games, and yet her 7 out of 10 sparked days of collective outrage. However, when the game released, fans saw the truth for themselves. Just days after Plaga's review was published, a post appeared on the Cyberpunk subreddit titled, Everyone Talked Shit About Her, but I'm starting to agree with Kali Plaga. On the whole, the review was more positive than the sentiment on the subreddit. The fan reaction was so intense that a new subreddit, r/low-sodium-cyberpunk, was set up by a minority of fans wanting to escape the swaths turning on the game for the exact reasons Plaga pointed out. What gives? At what point do you start trusting game critics and those who review your games? As much as you think we're different to you, that we have different agendas and want to tear down the things you love, we're not. We do love games. We wouldn't do this job otherwise. But we have to be honest about our opinions. There's a lot to unpack here. When we're talking about the Elden Ring DLC, sure, you can take the shot, but at the exact same time, realize that the vast majority of people that you're talking to, again, referring to the Twitter sphere. You're not talking about the everyday user, the everyday reader, the people that are using these scores to be able to make purchases and make them wisely. And that's where the core issue of this lies, is the fact that these folks are so focused on these people, these trolls more than anything else, that they lose sight of what really matters and the value that they provide to the customer, because at the end of the day, that's exactly what readers are. They are your customers. That's the reason why we've been driven away for so long, the reason why nobody's interested in it. Part of it has to do with the fact that media has just changed in general. People don't really want to read articles anymore. Most people would rather watch somebody on YouTube or a TikTok or watch a streamer play it on Twitch or something like that. But beyond that, pointing out Cyberpunk 2077 and Elden Ring and saying that, hey, look at these 2 times where you guys were wrong and we were right, doesn't really just wash over everything and make it a clean slate, now does it? And one of the things that they just kind of gloss over on this is that they bring up how Kali had brought up how they didn't like the edgy aesthetics and they didn't like the way that minorities were depicted in the game. However, that has nothing to do with players were actually agreeing with when it came to her article. It was the technical issues that she brought up that players were talking about that said, yeah, actually, she's right about this, and that the world really didn't feel all that alive at the time, which it didn't. The game released with a ton of issues, and it definitely was something where players were blinded by the game's marketing and the hype leading up to it. However, at the exact same time, they're yet again there's a difference between personal opinions and bleeding in your own ideologies when it comes to viewing a product or when it comes to reviewing that product and trying to deliver something serviceable to an audience. And I think that that's really important. You have to really realize and recognize who your audience is in the first place and what they are going to find valuable, and try to make the most valuable review, the most valuable criticisms, the most valuable articles that you possibly can. Otherwise, it's not interesting, it's not entertaining, and it's not useful for the user. And that's the biggest problem. That's the biggest root of all evil when it comes to this. Especially when they say, what gives? When are you going to start trusting critics and people that review your games? Never. I will never trust somebody else and go by their word, and that's what leads me to be able to make a purchasing decision. Nor should it for anybody else. Just the same as we should never believe the ads or the trailers that we watch either. We need to see more evidence before we make a purchase. And I think that players and just customers around the world have gotten a little bit more conscious of these things, and they've been paying more attention to it. And that's one of the reasons why when they flip open one of your articles and they see that you're talking about a lot of different things that don't matter to them, and you're really just looking for the most pertinent information possible to make sure that the game is actually good or bad. Does it run well? Does it not run well? What issues does it have? Is it things that we foresee that we normally run into? Is it something entirely different? Whatever it might be. That's the information that we're looking for, but 9 times out of 10, that's not what we're getting. Just recently, I talked about an article that came out where somebody was talking about how there was a sexist nature around the new Black Myth Wukong game, completely misrepresenting tweets and interviews and conversations with the developers, and then another group of journalists back them up and say, yeah, true, even though it was actually proven that they were mistranslations in the first place, that the conversations were misrepresented, but people still run with it. There was no apology, there was no turnaround, yet we're supposed to just trust blindly game critics and reviewers because there was a couple times that they were right and we were wrong. That's not how this works. Ben continues by saying, so find someone with similar opinions to you. While Eurogamer's reviewer found the DLC so difficult it spoiled their experience, our reviewer relished From Software's seemingly insurmountable challenge. I myself play and review a lot of RPGs and text-heavy games because I'm a book nerd at heart. If you too like those sort of games and welcome valid criticism of the genre, keep tabs on my Open Critic page. This is how to navigate the media landscape. Find someone your tastes align with, whose criticisms you enjoy reading. Find your Roger Ebert. Don't look at the biggest reviews on the biggest websites because you lack the important context about the person behind the web page. You can expect their review to be balanced and fair, but it will also be entirely subjective. Reviews are opinions after all. So you need to dig a little deeper to understand whether this is a perspective that is similar to yours. If your favorite reviewer writes for an independent zine, go for it. That might be more valuable to you than an IGN or the Gamer write-up. But no games journalist is out to get you. The vast majority try to be fair in their criticisms and unbiased when it comes to inconsequential arguments like console preferences. Nobody's going to give Astrobot a 2 because they love Xbox. Nobody's going to destroy a game developer's lives. We're honest, we're opinionated, we're human, just like you. Oh man, I almost wish that they'd started the article with this, because they're absolutely right. You should be trying to look for people that are out there that your interests align with, that your opinions align with. Not fully, because you want people that are out there that you can still disagree with, because it's good to have different perspectives, but you at least want to understand where their perspective is coming from and what their motivations are, or what led them to the conclusions that they came to when it comes to a video game review, whether that's the objective truths or the subjective opinions that they provide. However, at the exact same time, the problem is that this is also starting to create a lot of echo chambers, and that's exactly what they're basically pushing people here to do in the first place, which is, go find people that you agree with. Well, didn't you just say that I should be trusting all video game reviewers, or I should be trusting video game reviewers and journalists? But that's just not the case, especially when you talk about how they try to have fair criticism and they try to be unbiased when it comes to inconsequential arguments. There it is. That's the line. Inconsequential arguments. I just brought up an inconsequential argument within this article right now, and I could bring up another one in just about every single article that I pull up at any given time. I've covered a ton of them on this channel, and I plan on still doing that in the future because you guys just keep feeding me with just grade A content at this point. But that's the reason why players aren't interested in your writing, and that's the reason why many players aren't really interested in reading articles to begin with, is because a lot of this kind of content has driven further and further away from the player. I don't think that you hate games. I don't think that you hate the industry, but I do think you don't like the players. I almost know that for a fact, and in most articles that I read, it almost seems to be the case. You may be one of us, but you don't like the rest of us, that's for sure. The other problem that I have with this too is that they bring up how don't just look at the biggest reviews on the biggest websites because you lack the important context about the person behind the web page. I don't need to have important context behind a product that I am visually purchasing. I am a customer of your website. I am seeing ads that are on your website right now so that your company gets revenue, so that you get paid to be able to continue to write articles. And I think that's something that's being lost in translation, that they forget that they are trying to give a service. You are providing a service to me, to players, to everybody, and that's what you have to recognize. And the problem is that a lot of those inconsequential arguments that are brought up in a lot of these kind of articles, that's not providing any value to me as a customer. And that's a problem. And that's one of the reasons why these websites are dying. That's one of the reasons why your wages are falling behind. And it's one of the reasons why content creators, YouTubers, Twitch streamers, TikTokers, whatever you name it, are the ones that are taking over because, well, a lot of them aren't doing that. Simple as that. And it's just one of those things is that the more I read these articles, which again, like I said, I've covered a lot of them by now, is that these guys are just so involved when it comes to social media, and they think that's where like the vast majority of opinions are actually coming from. They think that's what the vast majority of players believe, and to be honest, couldn't be further from the truth. Yeah, you're going to have some people that are coming after you. I have people that are coming to you. Read some of my comment sections. Are you kidding me? When I first got into this is now, I think, I just hit a year and a half, almost at 90,000 subscribers, well on the road to 100K, which is insane. But when I first got into this, it was crazy because there's only just a couple people. You'd see like, 1 in 100 comments, somebody saying something crazy. But now when you start getting videos that have, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 views, I got a video on here now that has 20 million views, a clip. You see some crazy things that people say to you. And you know what I do? I ignore them. Because they're trolls, they're idiots, they're mouth breathers, they're nobody. Their voice is on the internet, and when I walk outside my door, guess what? They're not there anymore. And I think that a lot of these journalists, a lot of these reviewers need to start thinking in that kind of direction. They need to realize that some of the things that these people are saying, some of these things that they're bringing up on Twitter or whatever it might be, it's not real. And you need to do your best to just try and turn it off a little bit. Pay attention to the actual customers. Try to provide a valuable service. That's the way that you can get more eyes on your articles. It's definitely the way you're going to be able to make more money. That's for sure. Or start a YouTube channel. And probably be a better direction, to be honest with you. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, think about subscribing to the channel. Help me out. Try to get me up to 100K. And comment on the video if you guys agree or disagree. Outside of that, my friends, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, and most of all, follow me on Twitch. I talk about articles and stuff like this live if you guys want to catch some of that stuff. I play video games too, But anyway, peace.
Family, 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 family.